Good morning. Today we're going to walk through using Visual Studio Code and GitHub. My target audience for this video is a class that I'm teaching down at Virginia Commonwealth University on advanced programming using C++. But the video is going to be applicable to anyone who wants to use GitHub to store their source control and Visual Studio Code to actually write their source code. So I'm going to start from the beginning and use GitHub, create a new repository, which is where we'll store all of our code. Then I'm going to clone it to my Visual Studio locally on my computer, edit it, put some comments in, and send it back up to GitHub. This is going to be live, unscripted, so hopefully there aren't too many issues. So let's start over in GitHub. GitHub is a software as a service platform, whatever word you want to use, that wraps around the technology of Git. Git is a version control system that allows distributed development of code bases, so you can have a team of developers working on the same code at the same time, and it manages merging conflicts, it manages versions, tags, different builds, and a history of what happened within your application. So here's GitHub, and what I'm going to do, on the left hand side you'll see I have a repository section. I'm going to click on New Repository, and when I do that, you'll see that a window comes up that says Create New Repository. In this case, it'll be under my owner, my account on GitHub. I will create a new repository name. I'll call it something like Example for Visual Studio Code. Give it some temporary description. I'll leave it as a public repository, and I'm not going to add a Readme file. So a Readme file is kind of the top level document describing what is in your repository. This is how GitHub on a repository's page will show you what is in that repository, kind of the documentation of your application. So, but I'm not going to initialize that right now. I'm not going to add any. Actually, let's see. I'm doing a lot of C++. So let's see if there's a C++. Ooh, there is. Git Ignore. The Git Ignore is going to tell Git what files not to put into the repository. So things like temporary binary files, .o files for in C, C++, so we don't have those the files that aren't the actual code that someone's writing. Usually I don't pick a license, but today, since this is going to be on the internet, I'm going to see if they have the MIT license in here, just because that's one I know I like. And I'm going to click Create Repository. And GitHub is going to then tell me what it looks like. So here is the empty, almost empty repository we just created, example for Visual Studio Code. You'll see a Git Ignore file, which is going to have a whole bunch of things that GitHub or Git should ignore. All these precompiled libraries, executables, .out.app files. Then it generated what else did it do? It generated the license file, and this license file is where it says that any code in here is covered under the MIT license, which means basically anyone can use it, no restriction in this repository. All right, so now let's get this repository into Visual Studio Code. So what I need to do is, if I find this clone or download green button on the right hand side, I'll click on that, and it gives me two options. I can either use SSH or HTTPS for the communication from my computer to GitHub. For this example, I'm going to use HTTPS just because it's kind of quicker, easier. In a later video, we'll set up SSH keys so I can do all of this work without providing a username and password credentials, but instead the SSH keys will make it all work. So I've copied this URL. It is the URL to my GitHub repository. The end key here is examples for Visual Studio Code.git. I'll jump over to Visual Studio Code And in Visual Studio Code, I believe I hit View Command Palette or Control-Shift-P. I'll click on that. And when this little window pops up, I'm going to start typing the word clone, because what we're doing is we are cloning the GitHub repository to local. So I'll do that. I'll click Git Clone, paste in my repository URL. It's the full HTTPS, github.com, etc. And I'm going to press enter. It's going to ask me where I want to clone it. So I'll clone it to my desktop. And once I do that, I will hit select repository and it will start to clone the repository. Now I have not provided my username and password yet, so I imagine it's going to prompt me for it. Oh, it's not going to prompt me when I clone. Cloning is public, anyone can clone because it's a public repository. Would you like to open clone repository or add it to the current workspace? Let's add it to the current workspace. And now over here in my Explorer, I should have my example Visual Studio Code project. And you'll see I have the same license file, which has all of my MIT information in it. This is a legally binding document for anyone trying to use my code. Then we can click on the Git Ignore file, and again we'll see that it is here. So what I want to do is show you what a Readme file looks like when we add it to our source control. So I'm going to flip quickly back over to GitHub, and again you'll see nothing, there's no documentation here. It's going to say help people interested in this repository understand your project by adding a Readme. So I want to add a Readme file, and what that is, it's a markdown file that people can read. So I'm going to click back over in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to find the folder for my repository, right click, add new file, and I'm going to call it Readme. Now I've added this Readme file. Once my video catches up. And in that Readme file, I can type things. I'm going to type, this is an example project. I'll do some bullets. For class, for Chris, any other documentation I want in this repo. Now that I've put some content in this file, I'm hitting save. I hit Control S to save the file. Now over here on the left, you'll see this source control icon. It looks like little branches and nodes and all that kind of stuff. So we'll click on that, and here we'll see that there are some changes. So under changes, you'll see my file. I'm going to click this plus to stage my changes. So what that means is locally, it's the same thing as running git add on my command line. I usually do this from a command line, so this is an experiment for me in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to type in a commit message. Hit this little checkbox that says commit. Well, I don't have a Git username and email in Git. I don't know how to fix that real quick. How do I fix that real quick? Let's see. Can I do something in here? There's gotta be a way for me to tell it here. I wonder if I can jump to a terminal. So let's see what it said. It said to set a username and password. There we go. There's my magic. So I'm setting my git config. Global username, email address is my email address. Then you only have to do this once. I have not done this on this computer before, so I have to do this once. And then I'll set my name. All right, now I should be able to, let's see, did I commit? I committed. Now I can go and I can push these changes to GitHub. So you see I found the ellipsis more actions and looked for the push command. Once I hit that push command, I can see the slider, and eventually I'm hoping it's going to prompt me for my GitHub username and password sometime. I see my Wi-Fi connection is quite low on this computer, so I'll have to fix that later. I'll hardwire it or something fun like that. And this is the problem with live videos, is now I'm waiting. And I'm still waiting. I still haven't mastered the art of just talking to fill white space. It's a hard thing for a software engineer to do. I can usually talk about a problem, but I have a hard time just filling white space. It still hasn't asked me for a username and password. It should be. But let's assume it all worked, and it asked me for my username and password for GitHub, and I typed it in, and I pressed enter, and it all just worked. I would then be able to go over to GitHub, refresh my page, and in theory, oh, that's asking me for a login. Here we go. Sometimes these windows just, they hide. I have a super complicated password from my password manager on another computer. I really hope YouTube doesn't stream keystrokes, because that would be really bad. If they do, lesson learned. All right, so that happened. Get Visual Studio Code. Oh, it seems to work. I'm no longer spinning. I'm telling it to run git fetch on regularly. What that's going to do is it's going to tell my local IDE if there's a change in the server. So now I go back to GitHub. I hit refresh. Ta-da! We have our new Readme file. This is an example project for class. Oh, I didn't call it Markdown. Let's see if I can change it to Markdown real quick. So if I go back to my files, right-click on it. Can I rename it? Let's rename it. So here's another thing we can do with GitHub files. It'll track the history of them. Renamed it to readme.md. Now it knows it's a Markdown. Deleted the old file, added the new file, changing to Markdown. My video's behind my voice a little bit, my apologies. Commit, and again, click on the ellipsis, click the push button, fourth from the top, and we should now stage that change. So once that blue icon at the top stops sliding, which it has, I'll go over to GitHub again, hit refresh, talk about adding files that exist in my file system. We can talk about whatever anyone needs. Shoot me an email, leave me a comment here on YouTube, and I should be able to get to that